In this video, we're going to discuss the parts of an argument: claim, evidence, and analysis. So first, I'm going to discuss what those three parts are. Then we'll talk about how to put them together within a body paragraph. So the claim is the main point of the paragraph that you place in the topic sentence. So it needs to be an arguable statement, not just a statement of fact. It's the point of the paragraph. And it should be clear how that claim supports the thesis. It should be something that connects to one of the parts or reasons for your thesis. Secondly, we have evidence. That's the specific support that you give for this claim. And there are three main types of evidence that you can use: logos, ethos, and pathos. And you want to use a combination of all three of these types of evidence. So logos is an appeal to reason and logic, what I call the hard evidence: facts, examples, representative samples like polls, statistics, and these would usually be things that you would find through your research. In addition, we have ethos. That's an appeal based on the credibility and character of the arguer. So for us, that means a citation, almost always a quote from a credentialed, non-biased expert. So this is where quoting of experts comes in. And so that's also going to come from your research. By the way, the first time that you cite an expert in an essay, you do need to give that expert's credentials. And here's how you do it. You say their name, Joe Smith, let's say, and then you do a little, a positive phrase that gives their credentials: a professor of sociology at Harvard, and then the verb points out that and give the quote. Then you don't ever have to give those credentials again. You just do it the first time. But it is important to give those credentials the first time so that people understand why they should take what that person says seriously. Lastly, we have pathos, and that is an appeal to the emotions of the audience: statements, often stories, that appeal to the audience's empathy, to their moral values, or their ideology. Pathos is very persuasive. It's often the thing that gets people to want to agree with you, and then the logos and ethos is what helps reinforce that and convinces them that they should be agreeing with that. So it's kind of like a heart and a head thing, where the pathos appeals to the heart and the logos and ethos to the head. And again, you want to use a combination of these three types of evidence. Lastly, and just as importantly, we'd have analysis. Analysis is where you explain how your evidence supports the claim, the topic sentence, or the thesis. And there are two general types of analysis you need: framework analysis and evidentiary analysis. So framework analysis is your macro explanation, your big picture preview of the point you will be making over the next couple of sentences. So before just jumping right into evidence, you give a little preview telling the reader, here's how my upcoming evidence is going to support the point. So a good place to have framework analysis is after the topic sentence, but before you give the first piece of evidence, or before any other important piece or cluster of evidence. Evidentiary analysis is the micro explanation, the small picture explanation of how the evidence that you've just presented right before supports the claim. Okay, so these are the parts of an argument: claim, evidence, and analysis. Here's how you want to put it together in a paragraph. So number one, you don't want to separate those three just into separate sections of the paragraph. You want to intermingle the evidence and the analysis. So this would be a chart showing one body paragraph. So you'll have your claim in the topic sentence, and it will just be there. But then you're going to have a little bit of framework analysis before you give any evidence to preview how the upcoming evidence is going to support the claim. Then you give the evidence, and then if you need to, you give some evidentiary analysis to explain how that evidence supports the claim. And then you might need to preview the next big piece of evidence with some framework analysis, give the evidence, and then explain how it supports the claim and so on. So it's kind of a cycle of framework analysis, evidence, and evidentiary analysis. And you do have to make a judgment of how much analysis you need. Sometimes you don't need much evidentiary analysis, but you have to think about that possibility. But that's the general sequence. And then sometimes if you get a longer paragraph or a paragraph that's making a complicated point, you want to recap the claim. So kind of restate the topic sentence in a different way and in light of the evidence and analysis that you've just presented. I want to look at one more issue before we look at some examples, and that's your audience. So remember who your audience is. And our audience is other college students and college professors in the United States. That's an academic audience. So that's a pretty big and diverse group. So you can't assume that your audience shares any particular political or religious point of view. It just doesn't. So you don't want to cite political or religious sources in your essay as sources of authority. They might be examples of something, but they're not ethos. They're not sources of authority where you can quote from a certain scripture or a certain politician and just assume that everybody's going to believe what they say. So you don't want to cite politicians, and I give some examples here, or scripture, religious leaders or groups as I give here, because a lot of people are just not going to be persuaded by that and might even be alienated by that. So do keep that in mind when you're selecting your evidence. Okay, so we've looked here at the parts of an argument, how to put it together. In the next video, we'll look at some good and bad examples of body paragraphs using these different parts of the argument.